Please can I have confirmation that the live stream has started?
Yes, we're live, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jen. So I'm going to go to each councillor in turn to confirm that they can hear and be heard. It's a legal requirement for me to do so. And I'm going to begin with the members of this committee, Adults and Wellbeing. Councillor Bartlett, Vice Chair. Can you be heard?
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear you.
Good morning, welcome. And Councillor Bowen. Can you hear and see?
He's muted.
Councillor Bowen, you're on mute. Councillor Bowen, can you hear and be heard? Jen, is he still on mute?
Yeah, I'm trying to ask to unmute. There should be a pop-up on your screen if you can hear me, Councillor Bowen. Do you want to continue, Chair, and I'll give him a call in the background?
I will, thanks, Jen. Councillor Hanson, can you hear and be heard?
Was that me?
That's you.
Yes, good morning. Sorry, I can see and hear you.
Marvellous, good morning. And Councillor Price, can you hear and see?
Morning, I can see and hear you.
That's splendid. Welcome, good morning. Councillor Selden.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Loud and clear, Chair. Thank you.
Splendid. Good morning. Councillor Tillett.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can hear and see you clearly. Thank you.
Good morning, Councillor Tillett. Councillor Bowen, can you hear and
see? And I hope I can see and hear you.
Fantastic.
Hear and see me.
We can. Thank you. Sound and vision. Marvellous. Thank you very much. And I would very much like to welcome members of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee who've been invited to this meeting as non-voting attendees. Welcome and thank you very much for your attendance. Councillor Gandhi, the Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I can hear and see you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome. Councillor Toynbee, can you hear and see?
Good morning, Chair. I can see you and hear you. Thank you.
Splendid. Good morning. Councillor Hay, can you hear and see? Councillor Hay? Is Councillor Hay in the meeting, Jen?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. If she joins in there, if you give me a remind me, and then
Indeed, we've had Councillor Howell's apologies for the next one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Jones.
Again, not present, but we'll advise you if Councillor Jones joins us. Thank you.
And we have apologies from Councillor G. Andrews and Councillor P. Andrews. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair.
And welcome also to members of the executive, Councillor Crockett, who's Cabinet Member, Health and Adult Wellbeing.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear you.
Splendid. And Councillor Hitchener, Leader of the Council. Can you hear and see?
I can hear and see. Thank you.
Splendid. Thank you very much. And Councillor Norman, Cabinet Member for Children and Families.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I can see and hear.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much and welcome to you all. And we have a number of system partners and council officers present. I will ask each person to introduce themselves when they are invited to speak during the meeting. And I would like to take a moment now just to thank all of our partners in health and care for all that they have done during the last year to protect and care for the residents of Herefordshire. Appreciated. Thank you very much. So I'm going to open the meeting. Welcome to this meeting of the Adults and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee being held on Wednesday, 24th of March 2021. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. Streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making an official recording. Recording quality is maintained. Please speak as clearly as possible. Keep background noise to a minimum. Microphones should be muted when you are not speaking. Procedure and etiquette for the meeting. If any committee member loses connection and it is not possible to recover the connection within a reasonable amount of time, the meeting will continue as long as there's a quorum of committee members. When you wish to speak, please use the blue hand button, which depending on the Zoom version you're using is to be found either against your name in the participants list or via the reactions icon at the bottom of the screen. I will then invite you to speak in order of the hands being raised. Voting will be undertaken electronically using the voting software within the virtual meeting platform. Only members of the Adults and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee may vote. At the appropriate time, non-voting attendees will be moved to a breakout room until all eligible votes have been cast. In the event that electronic voting is not possible to use or there is a technical failure, I will ask each committee member by means of a roll call to indicate if they are for, against, or are abstaining. The results of the roll call will only be recorded in the minutes where there is a requirement to do so. So agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Have any apologies been notified to the clerk?
Chair, we have all members of the committee present, but obviously we've had quite a long list of invitees. So we have had apologies from, as we say, councillors Graham Andrews, Paul Andrews, and Councillor Philip Howells of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Watson, Cabinet Support Member for Adults and Communities, has sent her apologies. Chris Baird and Amy Pitt of the Council, and Susan Harris of the Herefordshire and Worcestershire Health and Care NHS Trust, and finally Jane Ives from Wye Valley NHS Trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Agenda item number 2, named substitutes. Have any named substitutes been notified to the clerk?
No, Chair. We have all committee members present. I just see that Mr. Vickers has got his hand up, so I don't know if we can.
Yeah, just in terms of, yeah, sorry, Councillor. Just in terms of apologies, also had apologies from Nisha Sankey from Taurus, representing GPs, also clinical sort of pressures have meant that they couldn't make it today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vickers. And Dr. Tate?
Thank you, Chair. It's just to say that I had sent a message saying that I had to leave the meeting at 10 to 11. Apologies, but I'm chairing another meeting from 11. So I don't know whether you got that message, but I wanted to make that now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tate. So agenda item number 3, do any members wish to declare any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or other interests in any agenda item? Bartlett.
Yes, Chair. Can I declare AN other interest? I have attended several of the ICS Executive Forum meetings, although not the recent meeting where the white paper has been discussed, but just to say that I do still hold an open mind on these discussions.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bartlett. Any others? Thank you. Agenda item number 4, questions from members of the public. On this occasion, no questions have been received from the public. Agenda item number 5, questions from councillors. No questions have been received from councillors. Agenda item number 6, NHS White Paper, Integration and Innovation. This additional meeting has been convened to consider the report on the NHS White Paper from NHS Herefordshire and Worcestershire Clinical Commissioning Group and to determine any recommendations the committee wishes to make. As the White Paper has wide-ranging implications, members of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee have also been invited to participate in this meeting in a non-voting capacity. We obviously have a number of people present who may wish to contribute to this this element, but I will suggest that we start with the introduction by NHS Herefordshire and Worcestershire Clinical Commissioning Group, unless anyone has any other thought in mind. So who wants to kick off the report, presenting a report?
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Mahaffey. I am the Director of Integrated Care System Development for Herefordshire and Worcestershire. I'm joined by 2 colleagues today who are looking around the screen, I think. Simon Trickett, Chief Executive for Herefordshire and Worcestershire CCG, and Dr. Ian Tate, the Chair of Herefordshire and Worcestershire CCG.
Well, welcome, Mr. Mahaffey.
So you will have received a report, which hopefully everybody's had a chance to look through, which talks about the new integrated care system white paper. It's called Innovation and Improvement. So what I'm here to do today is just talk through some of the key points before opening it up for discussion. I use the acronym ICS quite a lot rather than using its full term. But so everybody knows, ICS stands for Integrated Care System, which is the focus of the white paper. So this white paper replaces the white paper from 2012, or replaces the legislation from 2012, which created CCGs, and was also the legislation that resulted in public health moving across from NHS to local authority. The white paper proposes the creation of two new bodies or two new entities, an NHS ICS board and an ICS health and care partnership. And these two bodies together will form what's called the integrated care system. And it will replace the Sustainability and Transformation Partnership, which has been in existence for about 5 years now, which is a collection of all partners with an interest in health and care across Herefordshire and Worcestershire. This white paper brings a more significant role for councils, and it does bring much more focus on overall health and well-being of the population. So bringing councils, local authorities, NHS bodies, primary care, voluntary sector and other bodies together to focus on joining up care for people who need it most, improving the population of the whole of the population, improving the health of the whole of the population, and tackling health inequalities. Those are the kind of priorities that we're looking to work through here. This legislation will not affect the role of the Health and Wellbeing Board, although clearly it will be important to have a clear relationship between the Health and Care Partnership and the Health and Wellbeing Board to make sure that they work together well. Within this legislation, the CCG will be abolished and will be replaced by a body called NHS Herefordshire and Worcestershire ICS. In making that change, the CCG will no longer have a board or a governing body made up of local GPs, predominantly local GPs, but the board will be made up of local partners, so representatives from the local authorities, representatives from the NHS trusts, representatives from primary care, etc., and other representatives to be determined as agreed locally. The other main change that's brought about by this white paper is that the competition rules that have been prevalent in the NHS in recent years will change. So whereas before the Competition and Markets Authority kind of oversaw procurement in the NHS, that will no longer be organised in that way. So NHS commissioners will no longer be forced into a procurement exercise to buy services where there's an obvious local supplier that's best placed to do it. So for example, within Herefordshire, you've got Wye Valley Trust. The old legislation, in making sort of transformational changes, would have required the CCG to go out and look for other alternative providers that could potentially provide some of the services. We're no longer required to do that, although the option remains available if there is a perceived benefit to doing so to system partners. The other thing that's I would say is significant is that there are a number of functions that are currently commissioned from NHS England in Birmingham and from the Midlands region that will be delegated down to the ICS body. So things like commissioning local pharmacy services, local dentistry services, things like that, which previously weren't commissioned locally, but were commissioned regionally, will in future be commissioned by the ICS locally. The other major change that is quite significant is traditionally NHS bodies and local authorities have had a requirement to achieve their own financial targets. So, to break even, to deliver a balanced budget as an organisation, as an individual entity. Within this new white paper, all bodies also have an equal requirement to have due regard to the balance of the whole system. So if you think about the local arrangements, we've got Wye Valley Trust, Herefordshire and Worcestershire Health and Care Trust and the council. Certainly in making financial decisions, each organisation needs to have a regard to how it will impact on the other organisations within that system, which is different from previously where the prime focus was on individual organisational financial performance only. These new arrangements will kick in from April 22. So we've got 12 months in which to make the change to the CCG, to create the new boards, to get the membership working properly, etc. But in reality, it's a continuation of a journey that we've been on since the formation of the STP back in 2015. So there's not going to be a really sort of big bang launch around this, because across Herefordshire and Worcestershire, particularly in Herefordshire, through the One Herefordshire Partnership, there's been a strong history of partnership working, local bodies coming together to solve the challenges and the problems that exist in Herefordshire. So I think that it will be a continuation of that journey, but with some of the legal shackles that have made some things difficult taken off. So the ability to work together in a more integrated way that's previously been prevented by legislation that hasn't supported it will now be removed. So a much better position for us all to be in. And I think a really good example of just describing how I see it as a continuation of the journey is thinking about the vaccination programme that we've been going through in the last 3 or 4 months, I guess, but certainly the response to COVID as a whole. But if we look at how we've tackled that with the council public health department, the council with its kind of community engagement role, the NHS trusts and primary care coming together to roll out a really significant vaccination programme. That is what ICS working is about. It's not about some new programme that comes in from left field. It's about delivering what we need to deliver to improve health and care for our local population, but doing it in a more integrated way. So the white paper was released in February, so still just last month, but national guidance is still being developed from NHS Centre. And we are, as a local system, part of a group of 8 ICSs nationally. There are 40 ICSs nationally. We're one of 8 that, excuse me, I just need to... Too much talking already this morning, apologies. We're one of only 40, I'll start again. We are one of 8 of 40 ICSs nationally that is involved in supporting the development of the national guidance. So that gives us a real opportunity to feed in what we need to work for our local community in how things are taken forward. So in the report, I outline a number of benefits to the population in Herefordshire that we see being an ICS will bring. I've talked about integration. I mean, that's an obvious benefit that we're all conscious of, but also a lot more digitally enabled joined up care. And will have seen during the COVID pandemic the ability that we've had to be able to stand up digital care, video consultations with general practice in hospitals. We will build upon that base to make access to healthcare far better for the population of Herefordshire, particularly those in the rural communities. The other significant change we'll have is a single care record that all doctors, nurses and clinical staff will be able to access. So no longer will we be in this position where patients and population have to keep repeating the same story about their history, their medications, their things like that. Every clinician who's treating a patient who has a need to view that patient's clinical care record will be able to do so. And that will make a big difference to the quality of treatment that people can provide, but also the experience that people will have as they go through the system. And I think finally, I'd just like to emphasise a point about additional investment. Since the CCG was merged last year, we have made significant additional investment in Herefordshire, particularly within primary care services, and there are further significant investments planned going forward as we move into the integrated care system arrangements. So I think I'll pause at that point. Apologies for the slightly dry throat halfway through, but open it up for any questions or comments from colleagues, Ian or Simon, if they want to add anything.
Yeah, Chair, I wonder if I could come in as well, if that's okay, just to...
Of course, Mr. Trickett, yes, please do.
Thank you, and thank you, David, for that introduction. I mean, I wanted to just to emphasise a couple of things that David picked up there, mainly around, I mean, firstly, in terms of the white paper, it is just a white paper, and of course it has to find its way through Parliament. And yes, we have this timeline that's been published alongside it, that they expect it to take 12 months. And we're going to be working on the basis that this is what gets approved by Parliament. But of course, who knows? Parliament's a democratic process. Who knows what will happen along that journey? We've had a fairly unpredictable last 12 months. Who knows what 2021 and beyond will bring? So that's the first bit. The second bit, which I think is much more important, this legislation that's being proposed by the government a lot of it actually isn't very new. What it is designed to do is to tidy up and to consolidate the work that we've all been doing over the last 4 or 5 years. So I think it was 2014, the NHS published a 5-year forward view, the main element of which being integrated care. So this panacea of integrated care, and actually for the last 7 years since we've been working on that policy, lots of this has been put in place. So Stephen's team, Paul and Mandy's teams are working very, very closely alongside GP practices, alongside Wye Valley Trust. So actually a lot of this is in place already. What the legislation is designed to do is firstly to tidy all of that up. Secondly, to remove some of the barriers that often get in the way, so particularly the procurement stuff. So we've usually found a way around it, but actually the law would suggest, as it's written, we should have procured and gone to the market for a lot more of the services. We try and use our common sense, we try and find local solutions, and we go out on a bit of a limb, but it probably is contrary to the letter of the law. So primarily this legislation tidies up the law and allows us to be a little bit more permissive in terms of the procurement obstacle that we've often faced. And secondly, it does just tidy up the organisation. So you have a clinical commissioning group. I think we all accept that the clinical leadership that local GPs have provided has been really, really valuable. We'd also all accept that the days of commissioning, i.e. a whole load of people sitting in an office in St Owen Street, designing a service, putting it out to tender and then placing a contract, that actually is a bit old hat now. That's not how we do it. We want to work collaboratively with the people that provide the services to design it and come up with the best way of designing that. So the second thing the white paper does is it gives us the ability to do that on a more formal footing and puts in place really some legal elements that support the way that we've been working in recent years. So I think it's really important that we have the discussion within that context, that this isn't a revolution, absolutely. It's probably the next stage of what's been a gradual evolutionary journey for several years now.
Thank you. Dr. Tate.
Thank you very much, Chair. Building on what David and Simon have said, I just wanted to make 3 points. Traditionally, the NHS does governance, i.e. rules, then makes everybody work to them, i.e. it comes up with this is how you should look and this is what you should do, and just go away and do it. This time, I think genuinely they have listened. They've been, I guess, tempted to interfere for some time, but actually they've tended now, rather than putting the cart before the horse, to actually look at it the other way around, see what works, and then find a system that would allow it to work, i.e. a permissive approach that actually allows what needs to be done to be done. So genuinely, there has been some breaks on the push to get the law as the first component of this. So I would strongly agree with Simon there, because traditionally it hasn't done that. Secondly, just to be quite clear, not everything under a system has to be done at the system level, i.e. not everything is about Herefordshire and Worcestershire always doing everything together. What it is about is allowing individual clinicians and individual patients in their communities getting the help they need to both to look after themselves, i.e. self-care, right through to getting the highest levels of care, but only using scale where scale is delivering added value. So again, it's not taking away from individual clinician, patient, or individual place, e.g. Herefordshire or Leicester or Worcestershire with Bromsgrove. It's very much about providing what might be described as the orchestra to allow the individual components to get on and do what they need to do. And then the third thing is this clearly requires quite an intelligent partnership between the individual, between the patient, the citizen, the community, between the individual clinician or member of staff working in health and care, and not least the important managerial and governance systems that are there. So again, it's based on partnership in the most genuine sense, and therefore it provides an opportunity to do things that probably I've spent most of my career trying to get to this point in time. So I think it deserves a fair hearing. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tate. It does sound very positive and a kind of, it's a journey we've been on. Councillor Bowen, do you wish to say?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I haven't got access to my hand, my digital hand, because of guff on my screen. This, I believe, might be an access of common sense at last to the whole system.
Well, you never know.
I'm extremely encouraged to hear and read today what is on its way. I hope
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. If we're going to have the debate on this, we will have it after the presentation and officers have spoken. If that's all right with you.
Right. Sorry. I thought we come to that.
If everyone can just hold that thought. Hold that thought.
I'm sorry.
We'll be there soon enough. And but thank you for your input. So I think I will now turn to Stephen Vickers, Director for Adults and Communities, for any observations he may wish to make at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think the three colleagues from the CCG have articulated the position well, and it certainly does feel a more collaborative approach. I mean, Simon mentioned collaborative approaches and new ways of working, and and I think importantly, it's to recognise that actually, as has been articulated, that this is an evolution of the work that's already ongoing, and we've certainly seen an increasing and feeling valued in that partnership, both at the STP level across Hereford and Worcester, but also and particularly at Place. And it's really the Place that matters to us, I suppose, in this conversation from my perspective, and certainly that's where I would encourage scrutiny to explore in as thoroughly as possible, because it really does matter that we've got a place at that table at the ICS. Of course it does, but really this how that impacts upon us here in Herefordshire is the thing that I think we can have the most influence over, and particularly the interface with this new system and that of the Health and Wellbeing Board, for example. And very positively, I think, what we've been able to do in Herefordshire, and we've got a great place to start from here. Last year, you may remember that we sort of re-established a Health and Wellbeing Board to be more inclusive of our partners. And that was actually a part of this journey. So it was over a year ago now, it was pre-COVID, and to some degree, the evolution of the Health and Wellbeing Board has been stalled by COVID, but it's a blank slate for us to start from. But it really does mean that what we've got around that table are more partners, a more collaborative approach, and not just across the health and social care system, but also across the wider system, of course, because part of this journey is not just about the quality of service that we get and the value of the money we get from statutory services. It's also really important to reflect on the population and health and well-being, which of course is a system. It's not just the NHS or indeed adult social care that's responsible for, it is the system as a whole. And I think what this really does is connects all of that really well. So overall, whilst there's still detail to be worked through, and the devil will be very much in the detail, I think it as Dr. Tate has said, I think it's something that we've been working towards for a long time, and something that should be seen positively in that light.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vickers. I'm sorry, do we have a representative from the Herefordshire and Worcestershire Health and Care NHS Trust or Taurus Healthcare that would wish to make observations at this point?
I'm not aware that we have a representative present at the moment, Chair.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
That was
just checking.
Nisha Sankey did, as I say, she sent her apologies directly to me. She did ask if they should join later on in the meeting, but I felt that having missed much of the debate, it would be more disruptive than helpful. So they would have only been here for the last 30 minutes of the debate, and I didn't think that would be helpful. So I just
Thank you, Mr. Vickers. That's understood. And any comments from Health Watch Herefordshire at this point, Mr. Stead?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that we support the new processes and the development of the ICS because of the strong moves towards greater integration. From a Healthwatch Herefordshire point of view, we're clearly keen to see that Herefordshire, as a specific county, gets good improvements to services through that. We're very pleased that we are being involved in the processes, both locally in the place structure and also more centrally in the ICS structure. And we're very keen to work collaboratively also to encourage that services improve. And we've already had good examples whereby two-county working has led to better investment, for example, in mental health services, which would not have come about with Herefordshire on its own. So we're very keen that that kind of initiative goes forward. And we're also keen to assist with ensuring that the patient and public voice is heard strongly and is taken into account in decisions that are taken. And just to support some words of Stephen's, I think that the role of the Health and Wellbeing Board in the future will be important for Herefordshire to ensure that the system is working well for Herefordshire. And I think that that role is important to develop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Said. So, yes, I mean, overall, I think it does appear to be a positive thing. There's a journey that we've been on. This is removing obstacles to, as it were, completeness of that journey, and that would appear to be the right direction of travel. Really great to hear all these positive comments. However, I think the devil will be in the details, so reserve judgment on that. I'll make a few opening comments and a couple of questions, if I may, before opening it up to the rest of the committee. So I'm grateful to my Vice Chair, Councillor Bartlett, for pointing out the CFGS response to the white paper. And this is a slightly kind of internal comment, as it were, about the role of scrutiny in this new world. So that there were concerns raised about that and how scrutiny will sit in the new framework. So that might be something that we would wish to explore, and whether or not we would wish to take up the CFGS suggestion of building scrutiny into the duty to cooperate with certain defined parameters agreed with our ICS, in order to continue to be able to raise issues of public concern or local concern through that mechanism. And another thing that was an area of concern, and it's certainly something that would concern me, is the proposed extension of the authority of Secretary of State as currently drafted, which would remove the power of referral for variation in service. And I kind of understand why that's there, but nevertheless, I still feel that there should be a role in scrutiny to be able to put forward any local concerns and challenges to variations in service. So I'll kind of leave those hanging. I'm not really certain that that's going to result in a recommendation, but it's something that we might wish to pick up on and discuss. It's clearly the working together or integration is the journey that we've been on, and there's more to it than structural and organizational change. This is cultural, behavioral. It's very embedded. I think we're hugely advantaged in a sense because we've been doing this for a while, I think, and the COVID pandemic has accelerated those processes to the point where it actually feels that this is a natural extension, and hopefully will not lead to sort of unnecessary disruptions. It's simply moving through. That would be my feeling about that. The movement from competition to collaboration is very welcome in commissioning. That just seems a very positive thing. However, I do note that the King's Fund raise a concern over whether there would be a tendency or a temptation to remain with incumbent providers and not seek alternatives, and that therefore we might wind up with a slightly diminished diversity within the marketplace. And that, I think, would be that's a question, really, you know, and how would we mitigate against that? What are our safeguards going to be around that? And one thing that I would like, I know it's very difficult to bring detail right now because we're looking at a white paper, but I'm really intrigued by the potential of kind of the scope of this integration. And I was listening to Glenn Burley the other day, you know, sort of making a stab at describing how this might look with the ICS being proactive in supporting the wider determinants of health, as it were. So seems like a very holistic approach, and in a sense that I'm intrigued, I think, with where the edges of that envelope might lie, in as much as there are council processes that aren't sitting within Mr. Vickers' directorate, so maybe you know, planning, for instance. There are any number of determinants of health, housing planning, education, so on and so forth, and exactly how far this integration and collaboration will go if we can fully express it. So I'll leave it there. I don't know if anyone wants to pick up on any of those comments.
I'm happy to come back with some observations from the NHS side if you'd like me to at this point, or pause for other.
Yes, that would be lovely. Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
I mean, starting with the last one, I think it's a great point. The wider determinants of health are what we really want to get brought into this whole process. So it takes me back to a conversation I had many years ago, and I've told this story a few times, when I was working as a very junior trainee auditor in a Welsh local authority, where the director there said to me, the job of the council is to keep people healthy. The job of the NHS is to treat them when they're sick. And for me, what the ICS is about is embodying that kind of statement and making sure that we can really work together to keep people healthy. So good education, good housing, active communities, good community facilities and support. Those are all things that help to keep people healthy. That's what we want to be able to use this ICS for. So I think it's a fantastic point. And what I would encourage is that we look as far and wide as possible in trying to tackle the wider determinants, and don't just see it as the NHS working with adults or children's services, but the NHS working with the whole council. I think the point of competition, I would be at pains to emphasise that the white paper still really pushes patient choice as a very important principle. And as commissioners, we will retain the right to be able to recommission services if we don't think that either patients are getting a good service from the current provider, or that choice is poor, or anything like that. So it's not taking that power away from us, but it's not forcing us to use it when it's not required, which is the biggest benefit. So so we will certainly not be looking to just stick with incumbent providers if they don't deliver good outcomes for the population. I agree entirely about this is all about organisation and cultural change. It's not about structures. Just changing the structure of something will have no impact at all without the cultural change that goes with it. And I think Herefordshire is in a fantastic position. I said at the beginning, the One Herefordshire Partnership, which has been running for years. In fact, somebody's described Herefordshire, I can't remember who it was, as the place of places. So this place is defined in the national guidance as a geographical area that covers a population of between 200 and 500,000 people. So Herefordshire is down towards the lower end of that. But where providers, organisations come together to deliver services in an integrated way. So I think Herefordshire has been doing that for years, and it's been doing it exceptionally well. And I think a lot of the rest of the country can learn from what Herefordshire has been doing in that way. So I think what I'm saying is we start from a really good organisational and cultural approach to collaboration that some other places won't have, particularly in a city and more urban areas. I think there's a lot less collaboration within systems there. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how the Secretary of State powers play out. There's quite a wide-ranging increase in Secretary of State powers there, not just around reconfiguration and service design, but on all sorts of things. It will be interesting to see how that plays out. And finally, your first point about the role of scrutiny, I think it would be great. We really need partners to collaborate on this. ICS only works if that duty to collaborate gets delivered in reality. So if scrutiny can play a role in holding partners to account for how they collaborate, then I think that would be very good and very useful for us in the system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith, do you want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add comments on the particular point around competition and perhaps potential effigy. In absolute support of the comments of Mr. Mahaffrey, of course, the Council and the NHS has a long history of ensuring that competition, while not in an ideological manner, does drive innovation, and particularly this legislation does create the opportunity for that to continue. But I do absolutely support the view that, of course, whilst we wouldn't wish to have enforced competition, which is what the previous and current legislation does do, we always want to retain an element of that. And of course, the legislation does allow that. But I'm absolutely convinced that with our collaborative approach with our NHS partners, what this will create is the opportunity for us to retain what is good and transform what is not good in a collaborative way. Because of course, there are instances where the incumbent arrangement is absolutely the right thing for citizens and patients, and of course we'd want to retain that, whilst continuing to monitor and quality assure that it continues to be the right thing for patients and citizens. But in reverse, when things aren't going well, having the retained opportunity to use competition as a driver for innovation, we of course would work with our colleagues to ensure that that does happen. So it's almost the best of both worlds. And from a commissioning perspective, we do have the opportunity to enhance what is good and then transform what is not as good, because ultimately driven and legislative obligation to competition has on occasions led us to go to the market for services where the incumbent arrangements are exemplary and as good as they're ever going to be, but we're forced to go to competition, and sometimes that's resulted in unattractive results, because tendering is not an exact science, and unfortunately sometimes the organisation with the incredibly sophisticated tendering department can come to the forefront when actually the reality of their delivery is not as you would want it to be. So it does create an opportunity for us to be more transformative and more creative in our commissioning, which I welcome, of course, as the Commissioner for the local authority. And of course, Mr. Trickett and Mr. Mahaffrey and myself and Mr. Vickers meet regularly to discuss strategic commissioning matters, and will continue to do so should the ICS reach its conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm now going to turn to my Vice Chair, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, everybody, for your insights and information and broad brushstroke of what we got in front of us. Just to say, the CFGS, for those that are not acronym savvy, is the Centre for Good Scrutiny, which is an independent body that works with local authorities, the LGA and the government. And they've also been working with us actually with some of our own governance. So what I would like to do now is to start maybe drilling down into within that broad brushstroke to talk very much around what I see as going forward, some of the things that we want to be focused on and to understand a little bit better. So we have the white paper talks about having the establishment of a the unitary board and the creation of a new ICS health and care partnership. So we've got the strategic level and the place-based level. So what I'd like to understand going forward is how the local authority sits within those two boards, but more importantly, what is the interaction between those two boards? And then where does the governance sit within that? Is it going to be a top-down approach? Is it going to be a more collaborative approach between the two boards? Duty to cooperate has been touched on, and I suspect the role and the influence of the Health and Wellbeing Board that the conversation just started. I would expect that Councillor Crockett would probably want to say something about that. But in terms of scrutiny for us at our level, whether that's the children's scrutiny led by Councillor Gandy or adult scrutiny led by Councillor Swinglehurst, we scrutinise for Herefordshire, whereas the ICS we're in uniquely has two local authorities, unitary authorities. So we have, do we have the potential, should we have the potential for having joint scrutinies between the two local authorities? And how well does that scrutiny process sit in terms of the Herefordshire scrutiny, the Worcestershire scrutiny, and then the work of the two ICS boards? So I think that's something that I'd like to be cited on going forward. Then my main questions, and I think one of the other things as well is in terms of place-based delivery and the allocation of resources, the recognising the fact that some of our places are incredibly rural, and that service delivery in rural areas is more expensive. And I suspect that will be tweaked out in the discussion as well. But certainly those are my main questions, very much around the relationship and the governance of the two boards and between the two unitary authorities.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Ms. Mahaffey, is that something that you can?
Chair, I'll give David.
Oh, Mr. Trickett, marvellous.
I will have a go at answering some of those to save his voice. I'm a bit conscious about his health. I mean, really good questions from Councillor Bartlett, who, as she alluded to at the start, she has been present at a lot of the meetings, and I think she'll have a good level of understanding of the dynamic and the type of discussions we're having. So they're well-informed questions. I think the role of the two boards is one of the things that we need to do some work on during the course of this year. I mean, how we run our ICS, our integrated care system today, we have the Integrated Care System Executive Forum that Sir David Nicholson chairs, and Councillor Hitchener comes to, Mr Vickers comes to, and Councillor Bartlett comes to observe as well. That's almost like the decision-making forum. That will be replaced by a board of a statutory body, so a legal body which replaces the clinical commissioning group. So you can see a clear exchange of the legal responsibilities of the clinical commissioning group will pass to that statutory body, that statutory board. I would expect, in fact, it's within the white paper, the local authority will need to have a representative on that board. So whether that's the leader of the council and the chief executive, the leader of the council and the director of adults and communities, that's one of the things that will be worked out. But Herefordshire Council will need to have a representative on the board of that statutory body. Now, alongside that, what we do now, there is what's called an STP partnership board that Dr. Tate chairs, actually, which has a wider membership and also includes Health Watch. Mr. Stead is on there representing Herefordshire Health Watch. We have representation from local carers organisations and voluntary sector. So a broader, more consultative element to the work. Now, the Health and Care Partnership, as described in the white paper, actually has the same kind of purpose as the STP partnership board that we're running today. Where the interesting bit comes in, and where I think we need to do some more work, is the role and the relationship between the two health and wellbeing boards, one in Worcestershire, one in Herefordshire, and the health and care partnership. And I think that hopefully there will be a fairly permissive approach to that from the government, and they will allow us to come up with local arrangements that work, because there could well be quite an overlap between that which the health and wellbeing boards are seeking to do and that which the health and care partnership will do. And obviously we'll want to find the right balance between Herefordshire and Worcestershire perspective and the perspectives in each of the two local authorities. And because of the way we've structured our system, actually it probably is the local authority level, the Herefordshire level and Worcestershire level, where the most valuable engagement will take place. So one of the things that David will be doing with Stephen, Paul, Mandy and others during the course of this year is working through quite what that looks like locally. And they're saying that we have flexibility. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I think the scrutiny question is a really good one and a really relevant thing for us to be discussing today. So primarily the role of scrutiny committees is to hold us and other partners to account for the way in which we're undertaking our role. So are we fulfilling our public consultation and engagement responsibilities? If we're changing services, are we doing that in the right way? Are we being open and transparent? So I think those service changes will still feature just because that's what you do when you're trying to manage a health and care service. Scrutiny will still need to take place on any of those service changes or developments or strategies that are emerging, just like they do now. The decision making might be done at Herefordshire and Worcestershire level, but you should be interested, your committee should be interested in how those service changes manifest themselves for the population of Herefordshire, and is the ICS going about the process to deliver that in the correct manner? And you should be calling us to account for that, and I've no doubt that you will. I guess there might be a very rare occasion when, if there is a service change across both counties, you might want to talk to your colleagues in Worcestershire. I would imagine, though, the vast majority of scrutiny would need to carry on at place level. So at Herefordshire level, your committee will still need to be challenging us. You're interested in the impact of what we're doing on the population of Herefordshire, and that isn't going to change in this new structure. So I think that's really important. I also think it's important that when we talk about the health and care partnership, the health and wellbeing board and scrutiny, that we have a very clear distinction about what role each body is going to play. One of my reflections over the last 7 or 8 years, not so much in Herefordshire, but certainly when I've worked in Worcestershire, often Health and Wellbeing Board and the Scrutiny Committee have wanted to do the same thing. So they wanted to ask the same questions. And it felt to me a little bit counterproductive and a bit of a duplication, because it often feels like you're being scrutinised from all sides. So Health and Wellbeing Board should be about the wider determinants of health, the partnership approach, the contributions all partners can make to that. Scrutiny is quite a defined and specific role, though the impact of those changes and what's happening for your local community. So I think it's really important that we all keep in mind during the next year when we're designing this, how we get the right distinction between the role of scrutiny and the role of the other bits of the structure that are setting strategy. And I know you'll be doing that as a local authority as well all the time, won't you? But it's worth having at the front of mind in this work as well, because we don't want to get duplication, do we? So I think that's really, really important. I think your final question, Councillor Bartlett, was about place-based resource allocation, and that very much is part of the new operating model. We're lucky that we had Herefordshire CCG before. We had a funding formula that was calculated, which worked out at national level what the health needs of people who live in Herefordshire can look like. We've got the same in Worcestershire. Broadly speaking, as we promised, I think the last time I came to your committee when we were merging the CCGs, we tried to keep the money separate. We tried to manage the Herefordshire budget and the Worcestershire budget separately, and we tried to be very open and transparent about it. That's something particularly both health watchers have often challenged us on. So there is no reason why that won't continue within the new system. What we've seen this year is where there are opportunities to move money around and for one system to support the other, and it works both ways, we take those opportunities. And the scale of working across both counties and a budget of what will be approaching £1.5 billion, it allows us a little bit more flexibility to move money around to meet some of the needs. And I think it was alluded to in the paper that Mr. Mahaffey wrote. We have taken that opportunity this year to move some money into some of the areas of Herefordshire, some of the gaps, so particularly primary care investment, so particularly community health services. They've both benefited this year from that ability to move money around. But we will want to have, a notional place-based budget at Herefordshire level. We'll want Stephen and his team to align some of the local authority budgets as part of that, and we'll want the place-based infrastructure that the Wye Valley Trust and other partners are running. We'll want them to own that resources and the outcomes that we would expect to get from that. So I hope that's helpful. Happy to take any follow-up questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trickett. I'm now going to go to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee Chair and then the Vice Chair, and then open it up for all other committee members. So Councillor Gandy.
Thank you, Councillor Swinglehurst. Broadly speaking, I welcome this, and I can see significant advantages in formalising what, to a degree, is already happening. So I do welcome this. I think my concern is, as somebody that worked in the health service for 30 odd years and has seen many changes over the years and many variations on services, is that although we will be in a position as a scrutiny committee to scrutinise substantial variations to services, what we won't be able to do, and it has happened in the past where we as elected members representing our residents have been at odds with what the establishment wants to do with particular services. And so we've always had the ability, if we believe that the consultation process is not a consultation process, but it's more of an engagement, which is a very different thing, or where we believe that on the ground, that actually the decisions being taken are the wrong decisions, we've always had the ability to actually refer to the Secretary of State for consideration. Now that will be taken away from us. And although I have no doubt that everybody in the room believes that any recommendations or suggestions from scrutiny about consultation and whether it's been done correctly or incorrectly, we'll say we will take all that on board and we will ensure this happens. It doesn't always. And so I am concerned that there isn't this final opportunity to actually go to the Secretary of State if we feel as elected members that our residents their views have not been listened to and that the process has not been conducted correctly. I personally worked at the Alexandra Hospital during the time of reconfiguration of services there, and that was a disaster. And I just would not want us to be shut out of that opportunity.
I mean, I'm happy to come back on that, Chair, if it helps.
Yes, thank you.
I think you will retain the ability to refer to the Secretary of State. It's one of the areas of the proposals where there clearly needs to be a bit more work. What the Secretary of State wants to do is to take more individual accountability for this. So I think when it comes to service change, there will be a much more of a political element to that. But I haven't seen anything which takes away scrutiny committee's ability to make that referral if you believe due process hasn't taken place. I mean, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it says that, does it?
No, I think the point is more that the Secretary of State has the power to take an intervention without having a referral. So you still maintain the ability to refer, but equally the Secretary of State could take action if you choose not to refer for whatever reason as a local authority.
Can I suggest, therefore, that just in order to cap that off, that we make a recommendation, we get clarification on the role of scrutiny and referral of making challenge to variation of change, and that sort of then at least we'll have a joint understanding on that, if that's agreeable to everyone. Councillor Toynbee.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, everybody. It's good to hear positive comments. I'm sure there are lots of, I'm sure this is a great opportunity. The points I was going to raise about scrutiny, I think, have been covered, so thank you for that. I was going to broaden it out a little bit into sort of accountability in general and local democracy. Somebody just mentioned the Secretary of State. It was a little bit of alarm bells went off for me when I read that this involves new powers for the Secretary of State to directly intervene in the running of local health and care services where there's a perceived need. So that's a bit of an alarm bell for me. And somebody, I think it was Mr. Mahaffey, said it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. We've been hearing how little detail that there is in this. So I'd like to know what we're going to do proactively. I don't want to just sit back and see how it's going to play out. I want to know how we can feed in and what we're going to do proactively to make sure this works as well as possible for local people. As far as local accountability is concerned, public accountability, local democracy, that doesn't fit very easily with partnerships, in my opinion. And, for us, having representatives on boards isn't the same as accountability. So it raises questions for me about accountability and local democracy that I hope we will continue to explore and feed in on. And secondly, something quite specific about Public Health England. I'm sorry if I've missed this, but, with COVID, we've become acutely aware of our relationship with Public Health England, which in itself is going to be completely changed and abolished and turned into something else. So how does Public Health England fit in with this? Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to go first on this one.
If you would, Mr. Mahaffey, thank you.
So in regards to the first one, I think it is important to remember that this is just a white paper that's to be laid before Parliament. So all of the normal processes that we have to engage in the passage of that paper through legislation, through feeding in, consultation, etc., should be followed. So if you have particular concerns in that front, that would be the route to do it, I would suggest. Local accountability and local democracy is that's an interesting one. So it's a challenge that I think resulted in the original NHS England proposals that were published in kind of November time, a kind of a first draft of what they might consult on being changed. So in the original paper, there wasn't talk about having two ICS bodies. It was just talk about having one ICS board. The Health and Care Partnership was something that was added at the end of the process and came in to the white paper that was presented. I think that's all about trying to bolster that balance between local accountability and democracy and central control, because at the end of the day, we are a national health service. We have a national policy, national strategy that we are expected to deploy locally in a way that is right for the local population. So it's a constant balance between meeting those national obligations that are set at the centre and delivering local accountability. And I think the Health and Care Partnership approach and engaging more directly with the health and wellbeing boards will give us a chance to do that in a way that we haven't done previously, but still work to be done. And Public Health England, well, that will be replaced by a body called the National Institute for Public Health, or something like that. So I think it's a reformation of the national body that will clearly work differently, but I don't have any detail as to how that will look other than the intended restructure and the new name.
Thank you, Mr. Mahaffey. Councillor Selden.
Thank you, Chair. I thank Mr. Trickett for pointing out to us how scrutiny should operate. I'm getting a terrible feeling of deja vu during all this. And I think it might be worth just delving into a little bit of history here. I know Dr. Tate will remember the days before 2010 when Herefordshire went on a journey of integrating primary care trust services with the creation of Hoople, and that was all set up to integrate the back office functions of the National Health Service and an integrated care service that we started the journey in 2009-10. It's only to have the rug pulled out from under us by the Lansley reforms a couple of years later. And also worth pointing out that in the early days of the transformation plans, as they were when they first came out, local authorities were an add-on that the department thought about 6 months after they'd started the plan. And they suddenly realized that local authorities did need to have an input into this. So in a way, this is a huge step forward that local authorities are being consulted. And I use the word in inverted commas because I don't really believe this is a consultation. I think it's a foregone conclusion of what the National Health Service wants to do. Now, from the things I've heard this morning, and I can see an awful similarity to the days of Hereford and Worcestershire Council, where Herefordshire ended up at the blunt end of picking up the bits that were left after Worcestershire had finished with them. And if that kind of thing happens, then the role of this scrutiny committee will be essential in bringing that to the attention of the Secretary of State and whoever else will listen. But from what I've heard, it seems that that will be almost written into some of these agreements that are going to be signed off. And I don't think that's acceptable because, you know, if the service is going to follow the demand, then rural Herefordshire is really going to miss out, guys. We are not going to get the services we've got now if we allow this to go through in this form. And there have to be built into this some safeguards that says that rural Herefordshire will maintain that more expensive delivery model that it needs for the health of the population, or otherwise people will just clear out. We'll have a clearing of the Highlands again for lack of healthcare. And the elephant in the room, of course, that nobody's mentioned yet is funding. How the two different funding systems, the one that funds the NHS and the one that funds local authorities, are going to cope with working together like this. Because unless we sort out how social and healthcare is funded away from the realm of the way local authorities are funded at the moment, reminding you that we cannot set deficit budgets. We have to set a balanced budget. You guys in the health service can overrun and then assume that the central government's going to pick up the tab later. We can't. And that's something that the square has to be turned into a circle, because otherwise I think this old plan is doomed to failure in the way the other plans have. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Selton, yes, I would like some comment on that, particularly around the funding.
So I'm happy to pick up and start, and then for Simon to come in on some of the other things. I mean, just going back to the 2010 reforms. I wasn't in the system then, and I'm aware that things happened at the PCT and the council had tried to join up services, and I'm aware that obviously the Lansley reforms came along and undid those, but I'm not in a position to comment any more on that. I don't know whether Simon will be, because it was something happened in a time when we weren't running local services. I think the local authority add-on, I'd go back to what I said earlier, that we locally recognise that we've got the balance to achieve between meeting national priorities and national expectations with local priorities. And I would hope that Mr. Vickers would support us in saying that, you know, we've worked really hard in Herefordshire and Worcestershire to recognise the importance of partnership working for a long time to deliver integration with the council. And it's not just something that we're trying to enforce, come along with an NHS agenda. From the very outset, we've recognised that there's a much more significant role. I mean, I spent most of my career working in and around local authorities before I joined the health service, so I've got maybe a slightly different perspective on the role that local authorities can bring into this agenda. So I think we will continue to push on that and see that really important role. In terms of picking up the blunt end, I'll pick up the first part and then maybe Simon talk about the finance. We've agreed a principle of what we call subsidiarity in our system, which what we mean by that is we have two places, Herefordshire and Worcestershire. They're place defined by the national the arrangements. And what our approach says is if we can deliver the improvements that need to be delivered at place, then we will do so. So we think place first, we think Herefordshire first, and only when there's a compelling reason to think system, whether that compelling reason is because of sustainability, learning across both systems, whatever that reason is, then we start to think about what additional benefits can the system bring. So we will always start by thinking about how we resolve the challenges of Herefordshire in Herefordshire with Herefordshire partners, and only bring the system, the two counties together when there's an obvious benefit to one or other of the two counties. So I think that's the safeguard around keeping a focus on local priorities. In terms of the funding, Simon already talked about the keeping the budget separate, so I'll pause at this point and let him talk about that in a bit more detail.
Thanks, David. The only thing I think I'd say to Councillor Selden is to absolutely agree with him on the point around health funding and social care funding, and it is a bit of an elephant in the room. I do think the bit missing of this jigsaw nationally is, as a country, how we would propose to take that forward. We hear a lot of noise, don't we, from governments of various colours over the last 20 years that, yes, we know we need to sort this. Yes, we've got a plan in mind, but we haven't quite got to the point of that plan coming forward in a wider conversation. Undoubtedly, for all of us as citizens, it will involve some different taxation, won't it, as well? So I would agree that a national approach to alignment of those two service and funding streams, so healthcare being universal and free at the point of use for everybody, social care being means tested, there needs to be a way of joining those together for us really to be able to move forward integrated care. In the absence of that, I do think we find reasonable workarounds. So we have this thing called the Better Care Fund that Mr. Vickers' team and our teams work together on. That's the bit in the middle where we take some joint money and some NHS money and we commit it jointly. That helps to iron over some of the cracks in that relationship between the two funding systems. But I would wholeheartedly agree that actually a national funding solution would help integrated care move forward a lot quicker.
Yes, I think we'd all agree with that. Dr. Tate?
Thank you, and apologies. It's probably well, you'll be pleased to know I won't be saying any more because I'm going to have to go after this. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. Picking up Councillor Selden's point, yes, I was here for the PTT time and the Hoople and the wider partnership and collaboration, and it was a time of great hope. And I was similarly disappointed by the slamming the car into reverse that came at that point. I'm one of many who stayed and carried on the torch through that period, and that's why I'm still here today, because I think the opportunities of collaboration outweigh the understandable and very real risks that have been described today. Picking up the point on services in rural areas, there is an absolute duty of quality, and there is an NHS charter where there is a focus on the best approach to equity. Now, it isn't perfect, I accept that, but I think quite clearly, as Simon has articulated, that there have been benefits to Herefordshire from our partnership within the NHS of working with Worcestershire, and I can say that because I've done the transition. It will never be a one-way street, but there clearly are greater costs of service in Herefordshire, and that is recognised. I also would agree, though, that the with Mr. Trickett, that a final and proper settlement for adult social care and wider social care is an absolute must-do to make the maximum opportunity to get the most out of a partnership approach like this. And before I go, I just wanted to pick up that I would absolutely support Mr. Mahaffey and Mr. Trickett in the key role of scrutiny, and also in the key role of the wider determinants of health, because to be quite honest, sitting as a GP, sometimes seeing somebody with angina in their 40s who needs a bypass because of their smoking, it would have been much better to deal with their education, their housing, their mental health and their smoking in that order before they ever got to the stage of chest pain and needing cardiac interventions, which is why I truly believe that this approach does at least offer us an intelligent way as a citizen of Herefordshire and working in these two counties to actually have a realistic approach of delivering something that adds value. So there are risks in all of this. I've been through many changes, as many of you know. I think this is a reasonable stab at the next iteration. And just for your knowledge, I am being asked by Sir David Nicholson. I chair the current partnership board, and I'm being asked to lead the arrangements for the planning of the future partnership board going forward from April next year. And I will be quite clear that the sort of information that you fed in today needs to be taken into regard, which is why I was very much here today, even though my time was challenged, and I apologize for that. I wish you well with the rest of the meeting, and thank you for bringing this important topic to the fore. Thank you. Goodbye.
And thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very valued. Thank you. I'm wondering if we can start a recommendation around the ongoing role of scrutiny, for one thing, and also something around exploring the parameters of the wider determinants of health in other areas of council activity, and sort of integrate that, as it were. So we're kind of integrating with other areas of our own activity in some way. Councillor Ironson.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just very quickly, first of all, our son, before lockdown, was working in the NHS, and he says, well, the NHS is fantastic. The only thing wrong with the NHS is it hasn't got enough money. So funding is very important. And just to be clear that this white paper isn't saying that what was put in place 5 years ago hasn't really worked, which is a sort of conclusion that one might come to. Can you give me a couple, for example, describe what bespoke health actually means, which is in the paper. And also I do have great alarm bells on the key health and wellbeing risks, food advertising issues, improving food labelling standards. That's a vast, great subject and thing to go. It mustn't be dangered of being watered down to the extent of I mean, there are people who do deal with that, and it's, you know, it's an awful lot to put on one group's shoulders. I think I do agree with the concerns of the Secretary of State, and that we must retain our own scrutiny abilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ironson. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll so just on the key health and wellbeing risks, that's very specific in that the white paper brings new powers to enforce things like calorie labelling on alcohol, which doesn't exist at the moment. So it mandates manufacturers to do that. It's got it bans unhealthy food advertising before the 9 p.m. watershed. and there's some other things around food labelling, the unhealthy food labelling. So that's a very much a national thing. It's not going to be down to us locally to do anything, perhaps trading standards to enforce it if anything happens or it isn't being delivered locally. But I think those are very useful, because when we start talking about the key determinants of health, we know that unhealthy diets and particularly high sugar foods and things like that are such a big health risk and such a big driver of poor health outcomes for people quite young in life now, not later in life, but quite young in life. So those impacts, those interventions will be very useful and are very welcomed. In terms of bespoke healthcare, what we're talking about there really is trying to organise care around the needs of an individual. So if you, as an individual, have multiple healthcare needs, the experience of pathway-based care, for example, if you've got diabetes and you've got heart failure and you've got an audiology condition and a urological condition, is that you're almost being treated for your condition only, not your collective health requirements as an individual person. So what we're trying to do with this is change the way in which people access healthcare. So a person's entire health needs are looked at in a more organised way. So the urologist knows what the ophthalmologist is doing if there are links, and that the social worker is more engaged in understanding some of the low-level health needs, etc. So that's what we mean by bespoke healthcare, really tailoring it around people's individual needs and not expecting those people to tailor themselves around the convenience of the health bodies that are providing the care to them. Thank you.
I'm wondering if as you said, look, in terms of the kind of obesity strategy and things like that, which are national changes, but there would be an opportunity for the local authority and this partnership to springboard off that, as it were, to do comms and additional efforts around that, or indeed any other changes that come forward for healthy lifestyle, well-being type things, and that could be a kind of a broadly scoped recommendation that we watch this progress through, and as these things happen, that we're prepared to put our shoulder to the wheel, as it were, behind using those national changes. And I think that I did notice the Secretary of State would be taking onto themselves the power to do fluoridation, which I think would be a good thing. And again, that would be an opportunity to draw attention to oral health. So I think there are opportunities that I would like to see that we're alive to and that we're looking to capitalise on, and a sort of recommendation around that, if that's possible. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely agree. So just two further offerings from me. Reflecting on recommendations, going back to the Centre for Good Scrutiny, they do kind of offer up an off-the-peg type of recommendation, which we could use potentially to shape our own, which talks about requiring the agreement between ICSs and local scrutiny functions on modes of communication and engagement, reflecting the fact that in different areas, to meet different needs, different models of health scrutiny might be necessary. So it goes on to say this will also allow councillors to plan to focus their attention on those matters of greatest public contention, adopting a more targeted approach to their work. It will also provide for the ICS to provide support and resources of the necessary joint scrutiny to facilitate working between ICS scrutiny, place-based health scrutiny, local health watch, place-based scrutiny, etc. I'm not suggesting we go into all those additionals towards the end, but I think certainly something around the way that we communicate with each other and the way that we bring matters to each other's attention going forward, we might want to form a recommendation about that communication between us and that working between us. So that's my my offering on that. One thing that I would one last question I'd like to ask, and it's probably much more around the integration of whole person health, really, as Dr. Tate was saying about, you know, rather not see somebody with angina, rather have seen them be able to give up smoking and have a healthier lifestyle before they got to see him. And there's on page 14 of the agenda pack, there is in the white paper annex, there's a bullet point that says more opportunities to form joint committees and other working arrangements to support the delivery of integrated care. And I wondered whether it would be possible for, well, I was going to say either from the from Mr. Trickett or possibly from maybe Stephen Vickers or Mandy Appleby's point of view, how, or both, how they see those joint committees and working arrangements might possibly pan out.
I'm happy to start, Chair, if that's okay. I mean, just specifically the bit of the white paper that this is referring to is it creates a legal ability for the ICS to have a joint committee with one of the provider trusts. So through these proposals, Wye Valley NHS Trust remains its own legal entity and statutory body. As the law reads at the moment, commissioning bodies of the NHS and providing organisations can't form a joint committee. We can work together, but we can't have a formal joint committee that we can both delegate decision making to. Under these proposals, the integrated care system as a legal body could have a joint committee with Wye Valley Trust, for instance, and it would enable us to transact business. The ability already exists between the NHS and the local authority through something called Section 75. That gives us the legal ability to share decision making and share resources. This bit of the white paper was specifically about the provider and commissioner bits of the NHS being able to transact business jointly.
So that's interesting to me. So within the talk that we've had about integrating services, integrating the way that we work and our partnerships, we're also forming additional partnerships within those partnerships between certain members.
Yes, albeit I would probably say in reality, that work is already happening. We find a way, again, we find workarounds and find a way to deliver that partnership through different means. If the white paper is approved, there would be probably a clearer legal mechanism for us to form that joint committee and to formalise the partnership in a different, probably cleaner way than we have to at the moment.
So that's, to be clear, then that's just an NHS ability. That's nothing to do with the wider partnership that we're talking about here. It's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if you wanted me to just pick up perhaps the other side of that. I think the white paper will have some prescriptive element of partnership working, and I think in the way that Mr. Trickett has just described, quite specifically around those areas. But in the broader context of partnership working and the role and the different roles of different organisations within the partnership, I still think there's work to be done on that at place. And I think at this moment in time, we can very much heritageise that and really make it very relevant to us where it's less prescriptive. And I think the roles of the Health and Wellbeing Board and the role of the Healthcare Partnership Board that will sit under this infrastructure as well, there's real opportunities for us to be thinking there about the way that those two boards, if they exist as two boards, work together and the interface around some of those. What we would want to avoid, I think, is two boards looking at the same, kicking the same ball, so to speak. Wherever possible, we will want our system to be as effective as possible. We want our system to be as integrated as it possibly can be. And that's also at board level. But I think what that infrastructure looks like and how it works is back to that point that I made earlier, which is very much about what we can influence at place. And I think that this is a real area and potentially an area for scrutiny to make some recommendations for the ICS and the Health and Wellbeing Board to work out its business and potentially bring it back, obviously for scrutiny. But there are great opportunities in respect of that where it's less prescriptive, I think.
I think you're right. And so going back to my earlier questions about governance too and communication, bringing that back to scrutiny, as those two boards evolve, particularly with, as Dr. Tate said, that he's going to be much more involved with the board that's clearly nearer to our heart, the partnership board, that we have a good working relationship with this board, that an open relationship, that both know what we want to bring to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Yes, I'm inclined to agree. And I think that we could do with a recommendation around, as the sort of local arrangements start to crystallise, that we have another look at what they're doing and have some input at that point. If that's possible, please. Thank you. Councillor Tillett.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of observations about what appear to be emerging recommendations, and then a question. Firstly, there seems to be a wide consensus of our concern about the Secretary of State referral, which there seems to be contradictory evidence. But the fact is that even in the life of this council, less than 2 years, we have had recourse to use that power as the only option left to this committee, or via full council, to deal with our utter frustration of getting some straight answers and, dare I say it, some honest statistics about the repeated winter closures of the minor injuries unit, and to take away that recourse for us would be a really retrograde step. Secondly, if I understand you rightly, Chair, that there's some sort of recommendation looking at the way in which some council services could be integrated to mirror some of these changes. Certainly listening to everything this morning, more and more it occurs to me, particularly I think after that very powerful intervention by Dr. Tate just before he left, that it would almost be foolish and certainly a missed opportunity if the council itself didn't look at ways in which it could integrate services, even areas of responsibility, to mirror some of this integration. And we have the leader and 2 cabinet members here, so perhaps this isn't a question for an answer now by any means, but more and more integration of things like housing, particularly in my ward, which suffers from very poor housing, often very poor lifestyles, that in a sense housing and planning should not be divorced from adults and children's services. Similarly, public spaces and leisure activities. So some sort of mechanism to looking at ways in which some of those council services could be slightly integrated in the same way that the health service is going. Now, finally, my question, and I make no apology for being rather prosaic after a morning of systems and process. But as always, I and others are interested in what this actually means for the people we represent. And Mr. Mahaffey very early on flagged up a clear, tangible change and benefit in the sense of one continuous single medical and care record, so that you don't have to repeat endlessly to different professionals. And that benefit is flagged up in the document as well. But thereafter, where it talks about benefits to Herefordshire residents, it starts to wallow a bit in process and vagueness. So I would very much welcome from anyone here a little more of the very specific benefits, the changes that an ordinary Herefordshire resident using the health service will see. We've had the one about the record. I would very much welcome 2 or 3 more very specific examples of the changes that our residents will see. Thank you.
Mr. Mahaffey, is that for you?
I'm happy to go with one. So one of the most obvious ones and most recent ones will have been seen through the way in which the vaccination programme has been delivered. So prior to the last 12, 18 months or so, individual practices, GP practices, would have very much worked in isolation, one practice serving its community locally. The integrated care agenda has brought them together in what are called primary care networks. So I'm not sure if that's a term people are familiar with, but practices in a geographical area working together more collectively to be able to provide a wider range of services to patients in that geography. And if we think about the way in which the vaccination programme is rolled out, what we've often seen across both of our counties is one practice in a PCN area taking the lead on vaccinations, so they can really get through the vaccination programme much quicker through primary care than we ever would have done if individual practices were only delivering vaccinations to their own patients. So that kind of integration with practices working together at a local level, it's been seen in that example, but it will be seen in a number of other examples around same-day access to primary care advice, services that have historically been delivered within an acute trust setting are now much more able to be delivered locally by practices coming together. So that kind of example is another one that I would draw to your attention from the past, and one that we will expect to build on going forward.
If I can, Chair, I'd add on a similar theme. So the other big development in integrated care terms that patients should be noticing already and will continue to become more obvious, is the alignment of the team of doctors, nurses and professionals at your GP practice with the community nursing team, the district nurses, the occupational therapists, the physios, and then with the teams who are working with the council, so the social workers, the talk communities staff, the local mental health services. The whole principle of this integrated care agenda is to get all of those people working in one team wrapped around the patient. Now, you will hear lots of stories, I'm sure, from your constituents going back years of the handoffs that then occur within that process. That yes, they have a GP appointment who tells them that they'll refer them to the district nurse. The district nurse comes and they say, well, yes, but you need a pharmacist to review your medication, and they hand them off to them. So the whole principle that patients should notice more than anything else is this reduction in handoffs and passing people between different teams. The teams should be working much more collectively and much more cohesively, wrapped around the patient and the needs of the patient. And that applies to meeting their health needs, but also their social care needs, their loneliness needs, their mental health needs, their pharmaceutical needs. All of that should be done in a much more joined up and integrated way. And that's really what this is about. That's what all of this boils down to. Yes, that's more efficient, but more importantly, we get a much better outcome, don't we? When that works well, we get patients and families and carers get much better outcomes from their interactions with health and care services.
Thank you, Mr. Trickett, and I completely agree. And this seamlessness. Well, I'm going to throw a little bit of a spanner in the works and just and remind everyone that there are Herefordshire residents living in the twilight zone where none of this happens on the Welsh borders. And if there could be some thought and consideration given to how they too can benefit from a seamless and wraparound service, as opposed to some of it coming from Herefordshire, some of it coming from Wales, and nobody's entirely clear who does what. That would be, I think, just I know it's very tricky. I know it's a difficult one, but nevertheless, you know, the Herefordshire residents who I represent in my ward, and that they they too covered under NHS England Constitution should be considered for this, and particularly around data. The data sharing is a real challenge. That if your Welsh GP has taken done a blood test, and you go to Hereford Hospital for some surgery, they're not very good at sharing that. So there are challenges all around that, but I think we mustn't forget that that's still, as it were, ongoing work. Mr. Vickers.
Well, I think it's a fantastic question by Councillor Tillett, as is often the case. It's really the thing that makes the difference, isn't it? What difference does this all make to the resident? And that's most important, of course. But I just wanted to give another example of work that Mandy has been leading on alongside Paul and the commissioning team, is around the integrated discharge pathways that we've now got in place. We've seen a reinvestment in community services to ensure that people are enabled out of hospital more swiftly, they're re-abled, and they're going back home with a re-ablement level of support around them from an integrated health and social care system, connecting to, importantly, to that talk community offer. And that's really important. And as that service expands, we're starting to see increased levels of response within communities to our discharge, urgent responses from that service to prevent people from going into hospital, to our response service within communities, but people being prevented from going to hospital, people receiving re-ablement offers that in the past they would not have received. They would have waited for a social care assessment or a health assessment, and ultimately we may well have missed in days gone by opportunities for people to be maximising independence and well-being, so that they no longer need the support of health and social care services, or we can lessen the degree of that at the acute end. So I think there's lots of good work. The important thing there is, and I think it comes back to this point about what we can affect at place, but also the fact that the changes that we're discussing here today really are continuing or building on the work that we're already doing, because we're describing things that are already in place here, not things that will be in place in the future. We're talking about expanding on that. And the only other thing I would talk about, we've already, for example, as part of this process, aligned our adult social care services to the primary care network areas. And that's a first step really in trying to have a better integrated offer at place. One of the things that we can do, and this is again trying to connect this in terms back to that health and wellbeing board agenda, one of the things that we can start to do is look at population health needs by locality rather than across the Herefordshire as a whole. We can start to look at it by locality, and we can start to ask the local teams that are operating within those localities to respond to those particular challenges, those priorities that they see as most prominent in their minds from a health, well-being and social care perspective. And these are the opportunities that I think that this programme of integration afford us that I don't think in the past that we've had. And I think that from that perspective, again, building on what we've already got, so some great opportunities there. But I do thank Councillor Tillett for the question, because that's really what we should be, that's the test here, isn't it, is what difference it really makes to the end user.
Thank you. Yep. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You've actually stolen my thunder in some ways, and I was going to ask a question about Wales as well. Because I know from when I was a non-exec director of the hospital, we had the great new NHS IT schemes costing billions. I think it probably never worked as well as it should have. But Wales was never joined up with England. And was that going to be the same with our Welsh patients in the hospital, with our GPs? Because there's a great flexibility across there. I think it's frightfully important to have that sorted out. Otherwise, we're not going to be giving proper care and service to any of our people, well, any of the people involved in our borderlands. I do feel that there are very encouraging gleams of common sense in this program, or these suggestions from this white paper. And at last, we might have some flexibility and some seamless delivery, and not feel that the council is being should we say, taken over by the NHS, and they probably feel the same way around, and the equal sharing, proper sharing of the whole thing. We need also to remember that we need to make efficient use of our money in the hospitals, in our GPs, whatever. Yes, money is always a problem. We must use it properly and make sure that we do get some reassurance that the money is being used fairly and properly. And however tricky the question is to answer, this is particularly referring to the Welsh-English border question, it may be tricky, we've got to answer it though. So can we please have a little bit more about that? And also, with all this integrated care, is our IT going to allow it? In the past, it's been very difficult. There have been so many questions of, oh, it's improper to share this information, etc., etc. Can we make sure it is shared properly and there's no unnecessary handicaps put in this way? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I'm happy, Chair, to make a start on the Welsh issue, because I think it's always a really important and pertinent issue for us in Herefordshire, isn't it? So one of the things that David mentioned at the start, we're part of a national programme of early implementers of some of this policy, so testing it out. One of the things that obviously makes Herefordshire and Worcestershire unique is our place on the border of Wales. So this policy, if it's going to work, has to work in the bordering areas, doesn't it, as well? So there are a series of, we've got some good relationships with our colleagues in the health boards in Wales, some really good relationships, really developed particularly through the coronavirus response. So both last year when we had to deal with increasing demand, it created a real urgency for joint working. And actually, even through the course of recent months where we've had obviously the vaccination programme, which in Wales has been slightly different to in England, and lots of the residents that you mention are caught between that, aren't they? So we're well aware that we need to make this work for all residents of Herefordshire and for those residents of Herefordshire who are registered with GP practices in Wales. So we know we need to do that. I think there is a positive in that these proposals would bring the system in England a little bit closer ideologically to the system in Wales. So the Welsh health boards do work as integrated systems in a way that they've had a much less emphasis in Wales on competition and procurement and much more collaboration. What this actually does is it does bring the English system closer to where that gets to. So we're going to need to continue to work on the detail, but there are some positive signs, and it is also something that we will raise nationally. Your question on IT is a really interesting one as well. So I would estimate we've made more progress in the last 12 months on information sharing and IT systems in health and care, probably than we've done in the last 30 years, simply because there's been an imperative to do so, hasn't there? So a lot of our nervousness around, is it possible to do this? Can we share this information? Does this bit of legislation allow this bit of data sharing? Because of the pandemic, actually, we've had to put a number of those hesitations to one side, and we've just had to dive in and really go for sharing information to enable us to look after people properly. And you will see a whole series of digital and IT developments that have taken place over the last 12 months, ranging from the ability of GP practices to do video and telephone consultations, to particularly what Councillor Bowen refers to, which is the sharing of information about patients and their needs between various bits of the system. So I know, because we were working on it the other day, we've also, as part of that, attracted £13 million of national investment into Herefordshire and Worcestershire to help us pay for some of that infrastructure. So our digital development programme that Mike Emery has led, who is based in Herefordshire, he's led that programme for our system, and we've attracted £13 million of national funding, which is remarkable, and it's giving us a real chance of moving this agenda forward at pace. As I say, it's made huge strides this year, and my anticipation is this white paper, this policy agenda, will only increase that rate of progress.
Thank you very much. So I have no further comments or questions from members of either committee. So I'm going to move to comments from cabinet members. I'll start with Councillor Crockett, Councillor Norman, and then last but by no means least, Leader of the Council, Councillor Hitchener. So Councillor Crockett.
Thank you, Chair. Really interesting debate this morning, and I thank Councillor Tillett for his question and comment. I think it really connects well to Talk Community programme and obviously the county plan that we have at the local authority. We're looking at knocking down those silos, building cross-cutting themes, and this is the way that we intend to be working throughout the, this administration. We've already started looking at where social housing is needed. Other interests come in through Talk Community programme for where people want lifestyle assessments and support. I think it's really important also to think about the position of the Health and Wellbeing Board. In the last 12 months, we have renewed the partnership in the board, and I think that's been really pertinent, especially when you look at the ICS Health and Care Partnership Board going along the same lines, which involves police, fire service, and community cabinet member, etc., for social housing and housing. The only concern I have is that, yes, we are two very different counties, and Herefordshire is extremely rural, as we've all acknowledged today. And that's where I think Talk Community programme will excel even more. But my question really to David is, with the ICS Health and Care Partnership Board, how is this going to work alongside the Health and Wellbeing Board? What are going to be the differences? And as somebody has already alluded to, we don't want to be repeating the same thing. So how are we going to define the two roles? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's a question that we've been pondering since we first read this new edition of in the white paper on the Health and Care Partnership. And I think, I'd start by reflecting on the number of different ICSs that there are around the country and how different they are, and how this particular arrangement will be much more significant and relevant to some of the big and complex ones. So if we look at Greater Manchester, for example, there are 10 local authorities in the Greater Manchester ICS and a huge number of large NHS trusts. So not only would we have 10 health and wellbeing boards, probably something approaching 30 NHS individual bodies, you can see the need to have something that is additional to a health and wellbeing board to take a view across health and care needs over the whole ICS. Whereas if we look much closer to home, Gloucestershire is an ICS in its own right. It's one council, one health and wellbeing board. So okay, it's two tiers, but it's one upper tier council with one health and wellbeing board, I should emphasise. One major acute provider, one community services provider, etc. The need for a health and care partnership in Gloucestershire is almost non-existent, I would suggest, that the functions could be fulfilled by the Health and Wellbeing Board. So in a system like ours, where we've got two Health and Wellbeing Boards, I think what we need to do is think really carefully about what business we can do through the Health and Wellbeing Boards as entities in their current existence without bolting on a new arrangement above it. So we are in very early stages of thinking through how we might do that. And it might involve something like a kind of an occasional joint meeting of the two health and wellbeing boards, potentially, to look at cross-system issues. But the majority of the work being undertaken by individual health and wellbeing boards in their own right. Because if you read the bullet points in the white paper on what the Health and Care Partnership is there to do, it does look incredibly like a health and wellbeing board, doesn't it? So, the natural way for us to do that will be to look for as much alignment as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Norman.
Thank you. Well, I really welcome the debate we've had. There's been a lot of interesting discussion, different issues raised. I think the general, I'm very much supportive of the view that I think everyone's expressed, the welcoming of this collaborative or continuation of a collaborative approach. And as Councillor Crockett has said, this fits very well with our county plan, talk community, and things that are already actually happening. So I think it's very welcome, and I share that. I have got one or two questions. Well, first of all, I think the whole point about you can't say it too often, but tell it once. I do think that is really going to go well. It's just so frustrating for people who are constantly having to, you know, speak to yet another different person and go over the points that they've made many, many times. That will be very reassuring and it will be very efficient. So, you know, that is hugely welcome. And it's an item which I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget to welcome and mention. But slightly beyond that, I wanted to ask a question, first of all, about public involvement. How will we ensure the public voice is heard, particularly children and families, or children and young people, perhaps I should say. It's good to see Health Watch here, and they do great work in asking questions, organising community events and things of that kind. But I think we want to know that the public will be heard and will have that opportunity to put their views forward. And then the other point I wanted to make, or question I wanted to ask, it's great to hear about, a lot of people have mentioned the determinants of health. You know, we all know the background to people's health is as important. Prevention, working with housing, planning. It's also been mentioned that we're a very rural county, so working with our transport strategy would make sense, so that we actually have all those background issues part of the debate and part of the discussion. So I think that's welcome. But I would like to ask a question about how that's actually going to happen. Where will funding be? Will there be funding that can be shared to look at these things, as well as the preventative work? So mention was made of public health. We don't quite know what's going to happen there, but there is a lot of work we do through public health, which ideally would be preventative. And quite a lot of that hasn't happened because of COVID. Thinking about children's dental health, that's been virtually abandoned over the past year for all sorts of reasons. Dentists haven't been open and so on. But it's a very real issue, and we know it's an absolutely key factor in health, not just at the young people's age, but way into the future, and has an impact on a whole raft of things, obesity, you know, range of other illnesses. So it's really how the funding is going to be shared, I suppose, is a simple way to put it, between these partner organisations who are such an important element in particularly preventative work, but also in recognising the surrounding issues like housing and so on. So rather rambling question, but can we pin that down in any way? And finally, to say, and it goes back to my point about the community and giving them a voice, is this whole business of listening. It's easy to say, it's a simple, rather naive point to make, but that needs to be built in, listening to our partners if it's going to be a genuine collaboration, and listening to the community. Thank you.
Thanks. I think I got picked up most of those points. I think you started and finished with the issue about engagement and listening, so I'll pick that one up first and emphasize that it's critical, isn't it? Because we are only here to serve the population that requires our services, whether those are council services around good housing and education, or health services around treating illness. You know, to get that right, we've got to listen to what works for people and what doesn't work for people. And I think, you know, we're fantastically lucky in our system to have two health watch bodies that are very engaged in helping us to hear the voice of the patients and the population. I don't think that's true in other areas. Ian might be able to reflect more on the situation in others, but I think it's probably a little bit more of an acrimonious relationship, whereas here I think we do work well together. So engagement and listening will still be a very fundamental part of the approach that we take to planning and delivering services. In terms of the wider determinants of health, this is the thing that's really critical for me. It's really key for the way in which working as an ICS will make a difference, because we have had, if we're honest with ourselves, more of a divide historically between health and social care. And that often comes from the NHS bodies not thinking, I'm thinking centrally here around the way in which central policy is developed. But I think having the benefit of more engagement with bodies like ADAS and the, I forget the local authority, the local authority group, I forget its name, that have contributed to the consultation exercise. They've engaged with the NHS, and the NHS, I think, really has listened better this time to that position, because unless we tackle the wider determinants of health and we go back to working out what it is that makes people in the first place, then we're always going to be chasing, you know, a problem rather than trying to solve the problem early on. So I think there's some really practical things that we're doing and that we can do around that. One is we have much better data now, much more joined up and better data that helps us identify population health needs down to quite specific. Stephen talked about getting down to neighbourhoods, street level, around, you know, smoking rates and those kind of conditions that do affect people's well-being. Because we've got that data aggregated better, and because it's on a system where everybody can access it, it enables people to use it in reality. So our PCNs will be going through the data, the profiles they've got. We've got profiles for each PCN around local health needs. They will be able to identify what it is that's driving demand in their areas. And because they're then much more joined up with local authority services, they'll be able to take some real action. If it's a housing issue, or if it's a community engagement issue or something else, it won't be just seen as a health problem in this new way of working. And I think the other thing I would emphasise is the work we've done on tackling health inequalities. That's the other big drive that comes much more strongly through integrated care systems. And Simon actually chairs the system health inequalities group, which is really about taking the data that we can see to identify those biggest gaps, not just in outcomes, you know, life expectancy and healthy life expectancy, but gaps in access as well. Because we've seen through the vaccination programme, it's shone a light on health inequalities in a way that we perhaps understood, but we've now got a lot more detail about the relationship between access to services and take up of those services and outcomes. So some really high quality work and focused work on tackling health inequalities jointly with local authority teams will be another important part of our strategy.
Thank you. Mr. Stead, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, David. We are very engaged here, and I think a lot more engaged than many health watchers, and we really do want to support this process. Clearly, engagement is a massive challenge, and Health Watch can't do it all. But what we can do is support it and lead it in many areas, but also to encourage partner organisations to do it. I think where there is a consideration, and it came up earlier on, is where engagement becomes the need to do proper consultation. We're very keen that we don't slow down change where it needs to be rapid, but at the same time there will be some processes where there does need to be formal consultation, and I think that's where us talking to Scrutiny and other bodies is going to be important, because what we can't afford is to just have engagement, but the population say, well, we haven't been properly consulted, and it's just getting that balance right between engagement and consultation and when and where they're needed.
Thank you. I think that's a very good point. Councillor Hitchener.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this discussion. I'm going to have a few ramblings. Councillor Norman was saying her question was a bit rambling. I think my comments might be a bit rambling too. But first of all, I think I'm encouraged by the identification that Herefordshire is different. Simon's talked about that, and Mr. Mahaffey said the same. And I'm encouraged also by Mr. Mahaffey having had experience with local authority workings. I joined the ICS board, and having only just started with the local authority, so I was getting used to the local authority way of working, and then I was going to the NHS with a sort of two-hour dump every month, and it really was quite difficult to grasp all that. it was interesting that Ian Stead was the last contributor there, and I think he was one of the first to start to say how important the local involvement is. And I think we need to make sure that occasionally we might have common board meetings with Herefordshire and Worcestershire, but Herefordshire is very different. And I think there is an acknowledgement, and I think we should be pushing back against too much combining those sort of meetings together. There are different needs. It may be more hassle for the ICS to make the same presentation to the two different groups, but I think the needs are very different. And I think we as local politicians, we want to make sure that the local voice is being heard. So I think one of the recommendations might be of this group to kind of push back on that to make sure we do have local accountability and local reporting. It may be inconvenient for the ICS, but I think that's something which we should be pushing for. I want to talk a little bit about accountancy, accountability and governance. The idea is that the top group has a representative from the local authority. My experience on the ICS, and I'm tremendously grateful for Jenny, Councillor Bartlett attending most of the meetings, but those I've attended, I haven't felt I've had much of a voice, and it is very difficult when you're in a group which is mostly NHS people, and there are very few local authority. I was also, or the one or two of us, the only politicians. I've commented previously that Worcestershire tended not to send their political representatives, so it ended up quite strange, really. But I was struggling to really understand what I was going to be able to contribute, and I wanted to be able to contribute more. I'm very much aware that further lower down, where Simon is dealing with Stephen Vickers, there's a lot of work goes on at that level, but I felt a little bit remote further up. So I would want in a new, perhaps more powerful, more influential body, to there be some way of ensuring that the local authority voice is heard. How can I make sure that happens? How can we, as a higher board, how can we make sure that happens, that it's not so dominated by unelected and people who are all from the NHS? So I throw that out as an honest reflection of my own contribution. The idea has been mooted, I think, about having an independent chair of this top tier group. And I just wonder, what does that mean? Independent, does that mean independent from the NHS, independent from the LGA? How on earth can someone who is not embedded heavily in the NHS going to possibly grasp all the issues which there are and be head without actually having to be someone from the NHS? I do think that it's possible. Maybe the deputy chair should be someone from the local authority. Simon, I just throw those out as, possible reflections to make sure that, we here on this committee, we're politicians, we're councillors, we're locally elected. We're here to ensure that our people are being represented. How can we make sure that happens in probably one of the most important aspects of society? It's health and keeping people health. To go back to David Mahaffey's point, which I will remember, that the local authority is here to keep people healthy. And then when they're ill, they go to the NHS. So there are different roles. I haven't really experienced any ICS conversations where the kind of global pot of money is discussed. We talk about the NHS and a little bit on the finance of that side, how well or badly that's going. But apart from the Better Care Fund, we don't get taught very much about what the local authority is spending money on and whether funds are available which could either go towards the NHS or to the local authority. Whether that's the role of the ICS, I don't know, but we do talk about money, and money is so important. Councillor Jansen was saying that a relative was saying the problem with the NHS is it doesn't have enough money. Well, the same, Councillor Jansen, can be said about the local authority. We are having to spend more money on social care, which means we have to cut other areas. We are in the same boat in many ways as the NHS, and maybe we could have the sort of conversation at the ICS level as to where the money is going. I appreciate that's probably a national level as much as anything else. I think that's enough ramblings. I suppose the things I'd like to come out of this committee is first of all about it's about local accountability. That's really important. And the other thing is just the top governance. What is the expectation of this committee as to what comes out of that top group? How should it be managed to make sure that it's accountable appropriately? So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Councillor Hitchener. Your views are always welcome. Does anybody want to come back on any of those points?
It's probably my turn, Chair.
Mr. Trickett, yeah.
So I guess it's my turn. So some really good points from Councillor Hitchener, who has played an important role. So in his commentary there, he did question some of his contributions, but the engagement from Herefordshire Council in the ICS over the last couple of years has been really good, I think. And he points out that actually attendance from this local authority has been a bit better than from colleagues across the way. We've got good engagement, good attendance, and that's really, really positive, and it's really welcome. I think that the themes around ensuring the local authority voice is heard, reflecting your constituents and your democratic accountability, that is going to be one of the fundamental questions that will need to be answered this year when we plot the detail of how this legal body gets structured. So up until now, this has been participation very much on a voluntary basis. We've done the integrated care work because we all agree with it, we all support it, we all think intuitively it's the right thing to do. If the white paper is approved, if we create a new statutory NHS body, it moves on a level because it's no longer voluntary. It's something with its own legal responsibilities, and the local authority will be part of that. There will be local authority membership of that board, of that statutory body, and as a member of the board, you'll have accountabilities and responsibilities just like all of the other members of the board. The trick will be, from a legal perspective, how we balance how you discharge those responsibilities alongside with your responsibilities to Herefordshire Council and to your constituents who elect you. But that will be one of the key national questions. I think I heard and I hear a lot. I've worked in Herefordshire now for 3 years, actually. I'm just coming up to my 3-year anniversary. So I think I'm starting to get a reasonable understanding of the county, of the needs of the population, as to how it all works. This might be heresy, but I'm not sure parts of Herefordshire are that different to Worcestershire. I think the communities, there are a lot of similarities between some of the communities. Worcestershire, just like Herefordshire, is a collection of communities, and a collection of communities actually have quite different needs. And I think that same principle and that same observation applies to our county of Herefordshire as well. We have a collection of communities who have very different needs. Our job, isn't it, as people who design and plan and then deliver public service, is to come up with a package of services that meet all of those needs. And it is very true to say that package of services that will need to be needed to meet the needs of people in very North Herefordshire, on the borders of Wales, or in Hereford city centre, you need a different package of services to meet those different needs, don't you? And that same principle applies in the other county I work in as well. I think your reflection, Councillor Hitchener, on money and when are we going to have a conversation about the global financial picture is a really astute one. I do think that has to come, that will have to feature as part of the work of the ICS. And it's not just about the local authority spend on social care either. It is about the local authority spend on economic development and employment and housing and all of the impact that has on people's health needs. Because we know, don't we, we can have a huge impact on people's health needs by their wider well-being and the wider quality of life we're able to offer them. And the council, it is you that has a huge impact on that. So I would hope in time the ICS does get to those more global conversations of, well, we could spend X amount there. What would be the impacts of that? And what would be the impacts on health needs? And would there be a positive impact on health needs that would free up some money to mean we could meet some other needs? Those are exactly the type of aligned conversations we need to have. And just on your point around independent chair. So this is evolving. I mean, it would be a job that would be advertised. So it would be independent in that people would apply for it. It would come, I'm sure, with some kind of salary. One of the interesting things I've seen suggested in the last week is the Secretary of State thinks he will have a role in appointing the independent chair. So quite how independent they will be if they're appointed by the Secretary of State, you might question, but more of that, more details to follow on that, I suspect. All I would say is I hope very much we can attract some interest in that role from people that live in our two counties. I know Sir David Nicholson, who is doing that role at the moment. I know that he shares my view that it's much better that we own this ourselves. We don't really want independent people from outside of the system coming in. I think to work effectively in these two counties, you need to understand our population and our needs and our context. And that's much better done from people from within our system. So it might be some local authority councillors decide to put their name forward for a role like this. It might be people that have worked in the NHS. It might be people that have worked in other parts of public service. I would retain a really open mind around who will be best placed to fulfill that role, and then who we need to put alongside them to provide them with support. That's one of the parts, though. I mean, it will be nationally dictated, the process, the person specification, the timeline, the salary or whatever, all of that will be determined nationally, and we will pick that up. I think the feelings we're getting from the national NHS team who are planning this white paper, it will be in the second half of 2021-22. They will have to allow the white paper to find its way through the parliamentary processes, be at least, I think, on its second reading, before we'll be in a position to move forward and make appointments. Because obviously what they are most concerned about is predetermination or prejudging the outcome of the democratic process of this proposed legislation going through Parliament. So I do think we are a few months away from being in a position to filling those roles anyway.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to move on, cognizant as I am of the time, to recommendations. So the committee has been asked to consider the report on NHS white paper from the Herefordshire and Worcestershire Clinical Commissioning Group, and has done so, and to determine any recommendations it wishes to make to the executive and or responsible NHS body. I believe, Mr. Ball, we have some draft recommendations to have a look at.
Yes, Chair, if I just bring those up, thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully you can see my screen there with some draft recommendations. So the first one, that picking up on the points of members throughout the debate, and obviously you might want to adjust these as necessary, but the first one, it'd be recommended to the emerging integrated care system that proposals be developed for consideration and agreement by the local authorities in terms of the duty to collaborate, both at place-based level and in terms of joint scrutiny involving the local authorities, to ensure that modes of communication and engagement are defined clearly. Moving on to B.
That also was specific to a potential role for scrutiny in as part of the duty to collaborate. So I don't, as maybe just an add-on or an example, might be.
Or potentially a splitting of that into the into understanding the duty to collaborate and understanding how scrutiny fits in that.
Okay. If I just carry on and then I'll refine it at the end, if that's okay. So that clarification be provided about the power of scrutiny committees to make referrals to the Secretary of State, and if it is potentially at risk, that the system be encouraged to lobby for the retention of this power and for enhanced local accountability generally. C, that the developing Herefordshire and Worcestershire integrated care system governance arrangements, including the relationships with the health and wellbeing boards and how the voice of the public / service users will be heard, be presented to the scrutiny committee during 2021-22. D, that the intention is to explore the wider determinants of health and wellbeing and local population health needs, to consider opportunities for the integration and alignment of services, and to work collaboratively on tackling health inequalities at a local level be supported. And E, that consideration be given to the experience of residents who live on system boundaries, especially in terms of data sharing between England and Wales.
Yeah, very good. Councillor Selden.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we need to say something about funding regimes for both local authorities and the NHS to make this work. I haven't put formal words yet. Perhaps Mr. Bell could help me with that, unless you just go away and put something together in the funding. That's
I
good.
don't know whether or not in C, if we could add that developing governance arrangements and funding mechanisms be presented to the Scrutiny Committee.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I was just trying to pick up on, as well with the Health and Wellbeing Board, about the potential autonomy of both boards, keeping the autonomy of the boards and not being pushed too much towards, as being just, about joint scrutiny. So we'd see the autonomy of that, of our board.
Again, just change perhaps to see again that the developing integrated care system governance arrangements, including the relationships with and the autonomy of the health and wellbeing boards, whether or not that meets the need.
Yeah.
Okay, can I just comment on that recommendation? I think it's about finding the right solution for Herefordshire. Because the autonomy of the Health and Wellbeing Board could be, by one definition, be compromised by simply merging two boards, but that might be the best outcome. I mean, I don't think it compromises the work of the board. I don't think it necessarily has to compromise, the integrity more broadly. But I do think it's important, as I've said earlier, that whatever the future looks like, it means that there is at least an option for two boards to consider coming
well,
to.
we could say then, including the relationships and degree of autonomy.
Yes.
So we're trying not to preempt what.
Yes, exactly.
What local arrangements may come forward that we would then wish to look at, but one element that we would probably ask about would be the degree of autonomy of the boards if that's been a significant change as the local arrangements crystallise.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that acceptable?
I think it is. I think it's to give us give the local system as much flexibility as possible.
Yeah. It's the timing of this because we know it's early doors and it's being worked on. So we can't say this is what we think it should look like, because obviously it's not that's when it gets to that stage, then we would have probably that level of input.
Yeah, indeed.
Councillor Selden.
Sorry to come back again, but on the subject of the scrutiny process, I think it's really important that we keep Herefordshire as a separate scrutiny function, because in Worcestershire you'll be dealing with not only the county council, but the 6 district councils as well. So you've 6 or 7 different scrutiny setups, and how effective those are is debatable in their own environment. So I think it's really important that we keep our own scrutiny systems going here, and that we ensure that whatever emerges from this is answerable to us.
I agree. I think that probably is going to be better as a separate recommendation. Otherwise, recommendation A is going to become a bit.
Yes, sorry, Ben. I've dropped you in.
Bit of a portmanteau. It's just my feeling. What do you, Councillor Bartlett? What's your view?
Yeah, I think it's just about getting the wording right on this, isn't it? So yes, mine's a separate point. So I'm happy to see how Ben tackles it first.
The concern raised by the CFGS was around sort of embedding scrutiny, not necessarily joint scrutiny, but scrutiny individuated scrutiny in the duty to collaborate with the ICS.
Yeah.
Which I would, you know, at this stage, I would probably take that as being the likely outcome anyway, but we're not at that end of the decision at the moment. We're still at the white paper end of the decision. So I think as scrutiny, we would recommend that scrutiny has a distinct function within the duty to cooperate.
Yeah.
And that there are, you know, I think perfectly acceptable parameters, you know, agreed.
Yeah.
So it's not just a kind of, you know, open-ended power, but the ICS and scrutiny agree.
I mean, the wording they use, so some of the wording they use is providing for ongoing information sharing with scrutiny where information is gathered through the work of the ICS.
Yeah, it's a relationship, isn't it? It's a conversation.
So it is. It's about
we would need to know what's going on and to be able to ask questions and say, well, you know, we'd quite like to find out more about this or that or the other, and be able to raise any local concerns. That seems to be quite legitimate. So yeah, clarification of that.
So
yeah, I like C. C's good, open-ended stuff. It's good.
Are you
So,
happy
yeah,
to go on
Councillor
to?
Bartlett, you had another point that you wish to raise.
So, and again, so if we're trying to separate out the scrutiny from point A, and we've got to the comma at duty to collaborate, I think as well that's tied up with the duty to collaborate, and who's got the power in that relationship, if you want to be obtuse about it. I think it's about understanding not just that, it's also understanding the relationship between the two bodies that they're setting up through this, the NHS ICS body and the ICS Health and Care Partnership. So it's the relationship between those two bodies.
Yeah. Well,
and where that.
Well, is that not covered off in D?
No, I don't think it is. In E, did you say? Oh,
D.
the government are at D. No, because the Health and Wellbeing Board is a recommendation in its own right. You know, what is it? What is the clarity on the role and the evolution of the board and their autonomy through this journey of the white paper? So that I see the Health and Wellbeing Board as being a separate consideration to the role and the relationship of the two ICS boards that the white paper is setting up. Although they will come together, I think they warrant their own separate recommendations. I'm happy for the committee to pull that apart or whatever.
It's difficult until we've got a clearer, you know, sense of what comes out in terms of the proposals for local arrangements. That's sort of my hesitation on it, is I don't really know quite what the question is or what the recommendation is at this point, because we don't quite know what the
it's more of a question, isn't it?
like as they start to crystallise. So
yeah, I mean, it's more of a
we wish to be kept informed of this, and we wish to see it when it starts to crystallise, and at that point we might make a recommendation about the relative you know, the relationships between the Health Wellbeing Board and the ICS boards, and indeed the level of local engagement, influence, the role that we're playing, to come points raised by Councillor Hitchener, which I thought were very worthwhile, because we would certainly wish to seek reassurance about the you know, active participation and influence of the local authority in decision taking at every level of this collaborative approach. We could make something like that a recommendation.
Chair, I've just I've just expanded that the developing Herefordshire and Worcestershire integrated care system governance arrangements, including the relationships with and degree of autonomy with health and wellbeing boards, the arrangements or the arrangements for the different ICS boards, just so that we do pick that up in that request for a report to come back.
Yeah.
It's just that we've got that kind of flagged, but I don't know if that would satisfy Councillor Bartlett.
Councillor Bartlett?
Yes, I think that starts to tease out that they are two, whilst being interrelated, they are two different things. I think that helps. I'd be quite happy to hear what the rest of the committee think of those recommendations now we've pulled them around a bit.
So anyone else have any comments to make on those recommendations as they stand? No. Okay, well,
Madam Chairman?
Yes, Councillor Bowen.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just wanted the last recommendation, if we could see it again, please. If we could have, could we show the recommendations again, please?
Just taking a second to pull up.
Sorry,
It should be there now.
sorry, Ben. Could we add a little bit, something like also that data transfer of patients records, etc., should be made seamless and easy for all relevant relevant authorities or relevant services to access, something like that.
Mm.
Just a suggestion. Because in the past it has been very difficult. I know we were given assurance that things are improving. But I think we just want to make it absolutely certain that it is going to be simple and easy and effective.
So Chair, I've just changed F then to that consideration be given to the experience of residents who live on system boundaries, especially in terms of seamless data sharing between relevant bodies.
Yes, not just but also not those just who live on the system boundaries, but those who live within the two counties as well. We should be aware that IT and IT data sharing has very often in the past been tricky.
If I change system boundaries to geographic boundaries, then does that?
Well, can we cover both options off and have geographic and or?
Yes, I think so. Because
no way that covers all eventualities, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Splendid.
Okay, happy for me to take this down, Chair?
That's working for me. Has anyone got any further comments? Do members of Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee wish to make any comments?
I'm happy with those recommendations, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Gandy. Do we have any comments from system representatives or cabinet members at this point? No. In that case, please going to have a proposer and seconder for the recommendations. I will propose the recommendations and Councillor Selden will second the recommendations. Thank you. So I will now ask committee members to vote on the recommendations by an electronic vote. Please, voting attendees be moved to the breakout room and the number of voting members be confirmed.
Yes, Chair, whilst non-voting members are being moved out, we have 7 voting members on this item.
Thank you.
Not all have left yet.
Voting screen.
Okay, and the vote should now be on your screen.
They'll all be having a party next door now, won't they?
I'll tell you what, I haven't got a voting thingy yet.
Yeah, it's taking a little time to load, actually.
Okay. All right.
Are you in cloud, Jen?
Hey, here we go. Committee members, please cast your vote either for, against, or abstain. Please ensure that you press submit afterwards.
All votes are in, Chair, and those have been unanimously approved.
Thank you very much. Please, non-voting attendees now be brought back into the meeting. Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance, participation, contributions today. It's been really interesting, actually, and it feels like it's a positive way forward, working on, building on the good works that have already been done. Clearly, the devil will be in the detail. We'll hopefully get some of that detail back as and when it starts to crystallise. But I thank you all very much for your contributions. And it remains for me to say that the date of the next meeting, scheduled meeting, is on Monday, the 29th of March at 2:30 p.m. And I'm now going to close the meeting. Thank you all very much indeed. Can I confirm that the live stream